Well, hello everyone. Happy Tuesday. I'm sorry I cannot be with you today. However, we're not going to miss a beat. Your science class is still going to go on and we're going to continue on with our lesson. I'm going to show you, as you can see right now, this is your Schoology page for today. You can see that a yellow study folder has been added, but I'm going to show you what you're going to do today in science class. The substitute is aware of what you are to do, but you'll be doing this on your own. If you click today's science class, it says direction for today's science class. Read this first. And it tells you what you need to do. You need to watch today's video lesson. You can click here to open the lesson, or you can get it from the folder. While you're watching the lesson, you're going to be filling out this CAMI. It says practice problems for the Pendulum Lab. You have an exit ticket that needs to be submitted today for a process grade. And you're going to finish that big, long CAMI document that we've been working on, which is called Mechanical Energy Practice. A reminder that your test is next Thursday, and it is on the entire mechanical energy unit. And if you go back to today's folder on the main page, it tells you that your homework is to finish the CAMI document, that big CAMI document that we've been working on, all of the pages that are not done yet. You'll have class time today, and then anything you don't finish, you'll finish for homework. By completing that CAMI mechanical energy practice, you're actually getting ready for the test. You are studying. You'll notice that I added a yellow study folder. It says here, use the following resources to study: your CAMI mechanical energy practice and the yellow study folder. In the yellow study folder, I put notes and a study guide. You'll see that more things are added to this folder as the week progresses. So again, your plan for today, Tuesday, October the 4th, is to click this lesson and watch it. As you watch the lesson, you're going to complete this pendulum practice problems for the Pendulum Lab. It's a CAMI. You're going to complete and submit your exit ticket. You have 2 chances, 2 attempts, and Schoology will count the highest score. And then you're going to go to your mechanical energy practice like we've been working on for a long time. You're going to continue and finish all of the pages that are blank at this point. Okay, so let's talk about our Pendulum Lab. Make sure that you have your journal open to your Pendulum Lab because you're going to be correcting the information in your lab report during this video lesson. Remember, you should have the entire lab report done at this time. If you don't, you're very lucky because this lesson is going to allow you to complete this journal entry. So we want to compare the energy at 2 points. So the first thing you had to do with your pendulum was compare the energy at position 1 and position 2. And I'm going to have you look at a big pendulum that you'll see next class that's going to be hanging from our room. And we will use this big pendulum as a model. So here is the pendulum hanging in our room. It is a huge bowling ball. And here, Goofy Soyson is going to take that bowling ball. So that was position 1 when it was perfectly still. And now I'm going to take the bowling ball. It's an 8-pound bowling ball. And I am going to lift it very high. And I'm just going to hold it in that position. So hopefully at this point, it's very clear to you that at position 1, the pendulum was experiencing 100% GPE because it's not moving, it's in a holding pattern, it's at rest. To prove that, you could get a pair of scissors, cut the string, and your bob would fall to the ground. This was the same thing that you did with your pendulum, except you used a smaller mass. You didn't use a big bowling ball. Position 2 is also 100% GPE, but there's more of it. Even though it's the same pendulum, you lifted it to a higher height and it is at rest. We can prove that with math. Now, blocks 3 and 7, you do not need to know the formulas for calculating GPE. However, if you take a look, we already know the 3 things that affect GPE: the mass of the object, the pull of gravity on Earth, and its release height. It's the same bob that you used in your lab, and it's the same bowling ball in the video that Soyson picked up. So this is the mass of the bob. Here's the pull of gravity. And for the very first position, the ball was at rest, the bowling ball. It was 43 centimeters above the ground, or 0.43 meters above the ground. So if you do the math, you can see that the bob has about 15 joules of energy when at rest, when at position 1. But at position 2, because we took the same bob with the same mass, and it's still on Earth, so the pull of gravity is the same. However, I measured with a meter stick. I lifted the bob 2.33 meters, or 233 centimeters above the ground. So when you do that multiplication, it comes to about 83 joules. So at position 1, the bob has GPE, but only 15 joules. And at position 2, the bob has about 83 joules. So the question is, where did that extra energy come from? Think about that for a second. Hopefully you said it came from Soyson. It came from the person who grabbed the bob and lifted it up higher. So that's how this extra energy kind of entered the system. For you all in your lab, the energy came from you when you lifted the little 100 gram or 50 gram bob, and you lifted it to a 30 centimeter release height. That extra energy came from you. So the next question I have for you is, well, then where did we get our energy to be able to lift the bobs of our pendulum? Think about that. Where did our energy come from to lift the bob? You are correct. It's because we had to eat, right? We ate food. We ate that CPE, chemical potential energy, and our bodies burned that food or fuel so that we had the energy to take our hand muscles, wrap our fingers around the bob, and use our arm muscles to lift the bob up higher into the air. All of that requires energy for our bodies to do, and we get that energy from our food. So it starts, then the next question is, where does the energy from food actually come from? And it comes from the sun. The sun releases electromagnetic radiation energy, but specifically light energy, and it is absorbed by plants. And plants go through a very important process where light energy is transformed or converted into food energy, which are basically simple sugars, and we eat that. So even if I eat meat for dinner, I'm still backing up that energy towards plants, because the cow from the steak dinner that I ate the grass, and the grass got its energy from the sun. If I had a pizza, a vegetarian pizza, or actually a meat lover's pizza, I'm still getting the energy from the plant, because the pizza dough is made from wheat. Wheat are plants. The tomato sauce is made from tomatoes. Tomato is a plant source. And also, if I put any kind of meat, it comes from the animal that ate the plants. So again, all the energy that we eat, the CPE, comes from food, comes from plants, and plants get their energy from the sun. So that energy is passed to the person. We eat it, and then we digest it. We call that food or fuel or chemical potential energy. And then in every body cell, in a very special organelle that you learned last year in 7th grade, it breaks it down into usable, movable energy. Also to allow us to breathe and to think, to run, to hop, to move our bodies. That's all energy of motion. It comes from the food that we eat. Finally, I touch the bob, or you touch the bob, and you lifted it up higher. You put it in motion for a little bit, and then you held it in that holding pattern. So I just want to remind you that this process right here is really important. Remember, it's called photosynthesis, where sunlight goes into plants. Remember, plants also breathe in carbon dioxide, and they suck up water from their roots. And Inside every single chloroplast, all of the plant cells have chloroplasts. You learned this in 7th grade. They turn, in the process of photosynthesis, light energy is transformed or converted into food. Simple sugars that ultimately we eat. And then the plant also releases oxygen, and that's a good thing, right? Because that's what we need to survive. We have to breathe oxygen to survive. And then don't forget, if we go back, let me go back to this process right here. When we eat food, we don't keep the food stored in our body unless it's stored temporarily in fat cells. But eventually the food will be digested, the blood will pick it up and deliver it to every cell in the body, and in a special organelle in the cells called the mitochondria. So this is a cell. Remember, here's the cytoplasm. This is the mitochondria. It's nicknamed the powerhouse of the cell. I know you learned that last year in 7th grade. What it does is it allows you to get power to do work. That comes from the sugar that we ate from the food from our last meal. And our mitochondria will break that down. And what is released is energy. We are able to do work. We are able to move. We are able to grab that pendulum and lift it higher into the sky. Okay, so to go back, we just answered the first 2 questions, questions 1 and 2 from the pre-trials in your journal. So if you turn towards the end of your lab report for the pendulum lab in your journal, go to the questions for the pre-trials. We just answered numbers 1 and 2. We compared the energy at positions 1 and 2. And we talked about how you cannot create energy. So where did that extra energy come from? For us to be able to lift that bob to a higher height, it came from us. It came from our movement, and we got that energy from food. That food was traced back to plants, and plants trace their energy back to the sun. So the next thing you had to do in lab for your pre-trials was you had to watch the first swing. So if you were holding the bob of your pendulum, let's say here at 30 centimeters for the pre-trials, you just let it swing once, down, up, and you just focused on the energy and behavior of the pendulum just on the first swing, down, up. So this is me right now letting in slow motion, just allowing you to see the pendulum swing just on the downward swing. So here I go just down, and then we'll stop right there and take a look at just the downward swing. At this time, turn to questions 2 and 3 from your pre-trials. But you also can look at the data table, the second data table you completed for your pre-trials. So for the downward swing, we're just looking from holding the bob, letting it go, let gravity take over, and allow it just in isolation. Take a look at it all the way down to position 3. So what you should realize is that just like we learned from our earlier discussions, right now, the bob is not expressing any energy of motion right now. No kinetic energy. It's expressing 100% GPE. But as it goes downward in height, it's getting lower and lower and lower on the pendulum system. It's losing GPE until it gets to the lowest point possible in the system, which is position 3. At position 3, the bob expresses 0% GPE. So just like we discussed in class, position 1 would be maximum GPE, position 3 would be minimum GPE, position 2 would be watching the pendulum lose GPE as it gets lower, as it swings downward. So what else is happening? Think of this as anything going downhill. We know that anything going downhill will be at its slowest speed at the top. It'll get to about a medium speed in the middle of the hill, but at the bottom of the hill, that is where the object has built up all of its velocity, all of its speed, its fastest speed. So at this point, we can now say position 1 is 0% kinetic energy. or minimal kinetic energy because the bob is not moving. And then as it starts to coast downwards or swing down, it starts to gain speed. So it's gaining kinetic energy. Here there's a medium amount, and then it has maximum kinetic energy on the at the very bottom of the swing. So bobs will always have maximum speed at the bottom of its swing, the lowest point of the swing, regardless which direction it's going, which direction it's swinging. So now let's focus on the upward swing. We're just looking at that movement or motion upward, and we can say that the opposite is happening, right? So here we have maximum speed or velocity. So kinetic energy is maximum, but as anything is going to go uphill, it's going to fight against gravity. So that push of that force of gravity is going to cause the moving object to slow down. It's going to get as high as it can, depending on how high gravity will allow it to go based on its kinetic energy that it has. It'll go as high as it can go, and then for a split second it will stop or pause, and then gravity will take over and it starts to fall back down again. And then it'll start swing number 2, or technically the second half of the first oscillation or period. So again, what we have here is lowest height, minimum GPE, then GPE is gaining, GPE is increasing because of the fact that the bob is getting higher in height. And then here we have maximum GPE because the bob has gotten as high as it can in height. But what's happening is the opposite for KE. The bob is slowing down in speed to the point where it has maximum KE, medium KE, and now minimum or virtually 0 KE. You all experience this when you're on a swing in a playground where you swing as high as you can, and you'll notice that your stomach kind of goes whoop because you're feeling yourself pause in midair for a split second. You stop moving. That would be this position right here. Then gravity takes over and boom, you start on your downward swing again. So if we take a look at this diagram, we can put number values or quantities or some kind of written description as to how the energy of the pendulum is changing as the pendulum swings. So here at position A, when we're holding it, it has a velocity or speed of 0. And then what it does is it has maximum speed here at the bottom. And then again, minimum speed, virtually nothing. It'll pause for a moment and be perfectly motionless and have 0 speed for a quick second. And then as it goes down, it'll gain more KE because it's going downhill, so it starts to speed up. Then at the bottom of the swing, it'll be at 100% KE or maximum KE because it's at maximum speed. And now it's going back uphill again. So here it's going to be at 50% KE. It drops or loses about half of its speed. Therefore, it drops or loses half of its kinetic energy. As it continues to go up, it'll eventually pause for a split second and not move at all. So that's why it has 0 KE or minimal KE. So now let's take a look at GPE. GPE is the highest when you're holding it at the highest height. When it goes down low, GPE is 0. As it starts to rise up on the upward swing, it gains a little bit more GPE. As it goes all the way to the top, it's at maximum GPE because it's as high as it can go. So hopefully this diagram makes sense where you can use the words minimum, medium, and maximum. You can also use percentages like 0%, 100%, 50%, things like that. So hopefully you realize that we just addressed questions 2 and 3 from the conclusion questions to the pre-trials numbers 2 and 3. So we just went over the answers to numbers 1, 2, and 3 of the pre-trials in your journal for the Pendulum Lab. Make sure you update your journal. So if I was here today, I would ask for a brave volunteer to do this, to take the 8-pound ball, hold it up against your nose, and if you're brave, you will not move. When it swings back at you, shoo, look, you do not get hit. So we want to talk about why. Why would I let a student put their nose right up to an 8-pound swinging ball that's going pretty fast and feel as though they would be safe and not get smacked in the face by the pendulum when it swings back to them? And that's because I understood the energy of the pendulum all along. So let's watch that again, and let's watch it swing for a while. It's at my nose. You notice that I do not get hit, and it's significantly lower. It's a little bit like around my neck. It never got as high as it originally started. And look what happens as it keeps swinging, right? Do you notice that each swing appears to get lower and lower, and the swing gets slower and slower? You should have noticed that during your lab when you were counting the number of swings and you were using the stopwatch to time to see how long it would take for your pendulum to stop swinging. Notice here just our large scale pendulum hanging in the back of our classroom. Each swing is getting lower and lower, slower and slower. So then the question really needs to be asked, where is all of the energy of the pendulum? Where's it going? You can't destroy energy. You cannot destroy energy, nor can you create it. So we have to account and trace and track where all of this energy is going. In a moment, I'm going to take the camera and I'm going to show you that the string is connected to a carabiner on the ceiling, and then you can see how the whole pendulum is stuck to a metal bar on the ceiling, and that is called the fulcrum of this large scale pendulum. So here I am just taking you up with the camera so that you can see the pendulum swinging. There's your carabiner, and it's hooked to the metal bars on the ceiling. So this whole system is called the fulcrum of your pendulum. And what you don't know is that, because the sound is off for this video, and I'll model this for you when I return back to school, but you can hear the carabiner kind of squeaking as it rubs and grinds against the metal bars of the fulcrum on the ceiling. So as we think about the energy of a pendulum while it's swinging, we know in our lab and also in the video, you see that the bob will eventually stop swinging. It'll slow down. Each swing becomes lower and lower, slower and slower. Eventually it'll come to rest. It'll stop swinging. So it looks as though the energy of the pendulum is destroyed, but it's not. So we can actually track, trace, and account for where that energy went. It either transferred to other places, or it may have stayed in the system, but just changed form or transformed or converted into other types of energy. Or as it left the system, as the energy left the system, it also may have changed or converted form. So here are the energy transfers. The energy leaves the swinging bob and transfers into the air. When I come back, I'm going to have a student do this demo, and I'm going to ask what you feel. You should notice that you feel a breeze. Even when you were doing the pendulum lab with your small scale pendulums on your lab tables, you should have noticed a breeze, because some of the swinging kinetic energy of your pendulum is transferring out of the bob and going into the air. So it makes the air molecules move or swish around more, and that's the breeze that we feel. So the breeze you feel is evidence or proof that the energy left the bob and transferred into the air. Another option is that you'll notice, you all should have noticed, that your string on your pendulum got really tight because some of the energy transferred out of the bob and went right into the string. The fact that it got really tight is evidence that the energy left the bob and went up the string. Then it left the string and went into the fulcrum. And then it left the fulcrum and went into the string again. That actually can happen, but it also can go into the ceiling. So that was a typo. That should have been ceiling. So it goes into the ceiling. Proof of that is that I could actually get on a ladder, put my finger right on the metal bar that the carabiner is attached to, and I will feel that metal bar vibrate. And that is evidence that the movement of the fulcrum is caused by the movement of the string, which is caused by the swinging bob. All of that kinetic energy just transfers throughout the whole entire system, causing the little bars on the ceiling to vibrate. The other place, the other situation that's happening to the energy in the bob is that it will actually, the energy of the bob will also transform. So again, when the bob stopped swinging, some of the energy never left. It was in the bob all along. It just expressed itself differently. An example of that is the fact that the bob does keep swinging for a while. This is why you got a high swing count. While you're waiting for the energy of the bob to leave the system and go someplace else, it was also converting. The energy was transforming or switching back and forth between GPE and KE. So the energy will stay in the system, and that's why it was able to swing for quite a while, because it's just flipping back and forth between GPE, KE, GPE, KE, GPE, KE. So let's look at that on our diagram. GPE, KE, GPE, KE, GPE, KE, GPE, KE. So maximum GPE, minimum GPE, max GPE, minimum GPE, max GPE. We can also say minimum KE, max KE, minimum KE, max KE. So slowest speed, fastest speed, slowest speed, fastest speed, highest height, lowest height, highest height, lowest height. So you can see that the energy of the pendulum is literally flip-flopping or converting or transforming back and forth between mostly GPE to mostly KE, to mostly GPE to mostly KE. Let's see what other types of energy are being introduced and expressed by the pendulum. So obviously the bob is expressing GPE and KE as it swings back and forth, but it's also transferring or passing its energy into the string like we said before. And when that happens, the string is expressing a new type of energy called elastic potential energy. As you feel the string kind of go boing, 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 when it gets really tight, that's your elastic potential energy. But the string is also swaying back and forth. That's motion. So some of the string's energy is also expressed as kinetic energy. And then when the energy is passed from the string up into the fulcrum, remember I told you that the fulcrum starts to squeak. And that is because some of the kinetic energy of the fulcrum, as it's swishing back and forth, is also transforming or changing into sound energy. And by the way, I'm sure you're not surprised, as that fulcrum rubs and grinds against the metal bar, yes, you'll feel vibration, but you're also going to feel some heat. So ladies and gentlemen, your bob first starts off as GPE because you're holding it in a holding pattern. As soon as you release it, the bob is expressing kinetic energy as well as elastic potential energy, as well as sound and thermal energy. All of these different types of energy are expressed in your pendulum system as the pendulum is swinging back and forth. This is usually when students ask me, well, can a pendulum swing forever? And really on Earth, no, because there's just too many outside forces that are going to make the bob stop swinging. There's going to be air friction. There's going to be gravity pushing down on the pendulum. So we call that an open system. This is real world. It's more realistic because eventually everything's going to come to rest due to outside forces. So it's not that the energy of the system is destroyed. It's just that the energy left and went other places, or it changed form. In space, you might be able to get a pendulum to swing for quite a bit of time because of the fact that there's no friction. There's no air friction to slow it down. But however, in different places throughout the universe, depending on what star you're near, you can experience gravity, so that could influence the behavior of the pendulum. But a closed system is more like a hypothetical scenario where the closest we can get to it is in a lab setting where the objects in the system are not exposed to outside forces. So basically, you're just looking at the moving energy or the GPE or the mechanical energy of the system without worrying about heat being lost due to sound or thermal energy, such as heat. So this brings us to a very important vocabulary word for our mechanical energy unit, which is the law of conservation of energy. Albert Einstein is the one who discovered this. He is the one that determined that energy cannot be created or destroyed. The energy on Earth has been present on Earth since the beginning of time. So the amount of energy that was needed to light up the Earth by the sun during the dinosaur time is the amount of energy that's still present on Earth. All it's doing is just moving around and expressing itself as different forms of energy all the time. So when it looks like energy all of a sudden was created because your pendulum swung higher, it's because you pushed it. An outside force had energy transfer into the system to make it appear as though energy was created or added to the system. If your pendulum stops swinging, it's not because the energy of the pendulum was destroyed. It's just that it transferred out to other places into the world, or it transformed into new types of energy. So now we're going to prove the law of conservation of energy with some simple math. I want you to take out your Kami document from today's folder that says practice problems to the pendulum lab, and you can fill this in as we go along. So feel free to pause this video so that you can pull out your Kami document from today's orange in-class folder and kind of have the two screens side by side. You can split your screen and you can fill this in as we discuss it. So you would never know this unless I tell you. And I taught you at the beginning of this lesson how you can technically calculate the total energy of the pendulum depending on the mass of the bob, the pull of gravity, and how high it's released. So just in a hypothetical pretend situation, I'm telling you that the energy of our pendulum is at 2,000 joules, just to make the number simple. Again, I would have to give you this number in order for you to work through this math problem. But what we're saying is that eventually the pendulum stops swinging, right? Because it's not in a closed system, it's exposed to outside forces. So it's in an open system. It's exposed to the force of gravity, to air friction. So therefore, when the pendulum eventually slows down and stops swinging, we need to prove that the energy, the 2,000 joules that the energy started with, that the energy of the pendulum started with, it does not get destroyed. We're going to track and trace where it went. Remember, we said that a lot of the energy stays in the pendulum and it just flips back and forth between GPE and KE. So let's say that that is 1,000 joules of energy just stays in the pendulum, just flipping back and forth, transforming back and forth between GPE and KE. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why it took so long for your pendulum to come to rest, because the system actually kept its energy, and the energy was a little stubborn and it stayed within the pendulum system. But then remember that brave volunteer, which in this case was Soyson, I never got hit and bopped in the nose again when the pendulum swung back at me, because even on the first swing, the pendulum will never be able to swing as high as it started. And that's because energy left the system and transferred other places. A major place it went was out of the pendulum, out of the swinging bob, and into the air. Let's say 400 joules left the swinging pendulum and went into the air to cause a nice little breeze. And then some of the energy transferred out of the bob and went from the bob into the string, and then from the string into the fulcrum, and then from the fulcrum into the ceiling. Let's say that that's 200 joules. Then some of the energy actually stayed in the pendulum, specifically at the fulcrum, where as the fulcrum was swishing back and forth, it rubbed and ground against the metal bar on the ceiling, creating noise and heat. There's your sound energy. There's your thermal energy. So a lot of energy, a lot of kinetic energy of the swinging bob in the pendulum was lost because of the fact, not lost, but it converted into sound and heat. So it was there all along. The energy expressed itself in a different form. Let's say 200 joules of the swinging bob's energy converted or transformed into heat, and 200 of the bob's energy transformed into sound. When you add up 1,000 plus 400 plus another 200, 200, and 200, that comes to 2,000 joules, which is the original amount of energy that the system started with. So when the pendulum stops swinging, we know that it truly does still have, we can account for the energy. The energy was not destroyed, that the energy of the pendulum is conserved. And that's why this is called the law of conservation of energy. So as soon as this video lesson is over, and we're almost there, you will go and finish this Kami document. With scenario A, you're going to fill it out, and you have several options, just like what was modeled in the lesson, to fill out this swinging pendulum diagram. It starts over here on the right, and then it swings. You can assume that it is a closed system. And the bob, by the way, is a water bottle. So it's hanging from the ceiling, but it's a water bottle instead of a bowling ball. There are things you could do where you could actually treat the bob as a bar graph and shade it in according to what percentage of the bob is GPE, what percentage of the bob is KE. So you're going to fill this in just like we did for this diagram in our lesson. And then you're going to recap what a closed and open system is. Feel free to rewind this lesson to go back to those definitions. We did page 2 together. Page 3, you're going to look at a graph of the pendulum. So the red line represents GPE, the GPE of the system. So it starts off where the system is expressing a whole bunch of GPE, and as it swings down, it loses GPE. As it swings up, it gains GPE. But look at the blue line. The blue line, it looks like two parabolas, right? The blue line represents the kinetic energy of the pendulum, where it starts off when you hold the pendulum in the holding pattern, there is no speed, so the KE is 0. But as it falls downward on the downward swing, it gains kinetic energy. Here it's at maximum speed, and then it decreases down to minimum speed, or 0 again, as it swings on the upward swing. So I want you to fill out this data table like we did for the train in class the other day, last class actually. And remember, you should see that the GPE and the KE should add up to the total energy of the system. So what's the total energy of the system? 100 joules. Let's just randomly do 1.5 seconds together. So I go to 1.5 seconds and I see that the GPE is at 25 joules and the KE is at 75 joules. So the GPE is at 25 joules and the KE is at 75 joules. Remember, the formula and definition for mechanical energy is the total potential and kinetic energy of the system added together. The potential energy of our system is specifically GPE, and there's our kinetic. When you add 25 and 75, it should come to 100 joules. And as you know, the law of conservation of energy states energy cannot be created or destroyed. So if this pendulum starts with 100 joules of energy, that means throughout the entire event of the pendulum swinging, the total energy of the system must always add up to 100 joules. You are on your own to complete the rest of the data table. And then for scenario D, you're going to do the same thing. It is a ball. It has 3 options to get to the lower level or the lowest point of the system. The ball can go boop, 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 boop. It can fall down the steps. And it's a continual motion down the steps. So what we're doing is we're kind of freeze framing and saying, well, what's its energy like as it's falling down 1, 2, 3, the 3rd step? The other option is that the ball can roll down the ramp. The other option is that the ball can free fall down. So you're going to complete this data table so that the total energy of the system comes to 50 joules every single time. For the remainder of today's lesson, I am going to show you the answers to the rest of the pendulum lab. Feel free to pause the video to update your journal. This is our lab's independent variable, dependent variable. Once we know the independent and dependent variable, we can plug it in to do the problem or purpose of the lab, to determine the problem or purpose of the lab. Now, this is the problem or purpose of our lab with the equipment that we used with the hooked weights, the fishing wire string, and the ring stands. However, please note that a swinging pendulum that we used in lab is supposed to represent any scenario in the real world, which is how does the total mechanical energy of the system affect the behavior of the system? In other words, how will the energy transfer and transform as the system is being used? So this is applying the purpose of our lab to the real world. Control variables. This would be our control trial. Constant variables. These are our 3 constant variables. Again, feel free to pause the video in case you need time to copy and correct your journal. Also, get a different color pen or pencil at this time. I want you to put in, you do not need to erase your old data. You're just going to squeeze it in the box to show the 8th grade data, because the 8th grade data is much more reliable. It is based on 125 trials. I was able to visit 125 teams, and this is the data that we got. If there are any teams from my B-Day students that did not finish the lab, you are excused because you now have data for your data table. I'm also going over the answers to the conclusion questions, which if you paid attention closely to today's lesson, the lesson brings out the big ideas and the answers to all conclusion questions. So here are the answers to numbers 1 and 2. Ultimately, when you are messing around with the GPE that the bob starts with, by making the bob heavier or lighter and making the bob be released from a lower or higher release point, you are actually messing around with the total mechanical energy of the system. In other words, how much energy the system started with before you let it go. Question number 3, again, if you change the release height and make it higher, you're actually giving the system more mechanical energy, which means it's going to take longer for you to wait for the pendulum to stop swinging and come to rest. Don't forget, mass does not affect speed, only release height. So if you have the 100-gram bob released from 2 different release heights, let's say 10 and 60 centimeters, the speed of the pendulum is based on release height. If it's released from the same height, let's say 100 centimeters, they would be falling at the same speed. But if you change it between 20 and 60 centimeters, the one that was released from the higher release height will be at a faster speed. The bob at the lower release height will be at a slower speed, assuming that it's the same massed bob. And then this was the big idea of our lesson today. This was the big message I wanted you to get out of the lesson. So to recap, here are the directions for today in case you get lost. This is the lesson that you just watched. Here is the CAMI document that you are in the middle of filling out. You need to finish it. You do not need to submit. Here is the exit ticket that you must submit for a grade. You have 2 opportunities. It's your exit ticket for today. It counts as a 12-point process grade. The remainder of the class, you will be finishing your mechanical energy CAMI document. Remember that this is the long one, and we've got several pages to finish. You're going to use this class time to do that, and anything you do not finish, you will finish for homework. Your homework is to finish the CAMI document, Mechanical Energy Practice, and to start studying. Use the resources. You have 2 resources right now to help you start studying for next Thursday's test. Have a great day, everyone.